I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the phone screen, the words on the text message glaring back at me. My hands trembled as I read it over and over, hoping that I had misread it the first time. But no, there it was, clear as day. We're not in a position to help. You'll have to find another way. It was from my parents. I had never expected this. Not from them. Not when it came to my daughter, Lily. She needed a life-saving surgery, $150K to be exact. I thought surely they would help. After all, they had always promised that family would come first. But in that moment, they proved me wrong. They didn't even hesitate. The words of refusal were so cold, so final. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. But what hurt more wasn't just their refusal to help. It was the photos I saw just days later. My parents, smiling brightly at my sister's lavish wedding. An event that cost them over $350,000. Every detail was perfect. The venue, the designer dress, the extravagant reception. Everything except for me. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. How could they spend millions on a wedding when their granddaughter's life was on the line? How could they choose my sister over their own blood? I felt betrayed. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry. No, I was going to do something they would never expect. Something quiet, something they wouldn't see coming. I wasn't just going to let this go, but they had no idea what was coming next. Growing up, I often felt like a ghost in my own home. My parents, both high achievers in their fields, ran our house like a well-oiled machine. Everything was about appearances, about success, about getting things right. But love? That was something I never quite understood. It wasn't something you earned with hugs or kind words, but something you proved with accomplishments. And no matter how hard I tried, it always felt like I was falling short. My sister, on the other hand, was everything they wanted in a daughter. Her charm, her natural grace, the way she walked into a room and instantly captivated everyone. My parents adored her. I couldn't blame them. She was beautiful, confident, and effortless in a way that I could never quite emulate. But it wasn't just her personality that won them over. It was the attention she commanded. All eyes were always on her. At every family gathering, at every birthday, at every holiday, she was the star. And I was the one who blended into the background. As a child, I didn't understand the difference in how my parents treated us. I just thought I wasn't good enough. Maybe if I worked harder, if I was more like her, they'd finally see me. I'd get their approval. But every time I thought I was close, they'd turn their attention back to her, making it clear that I could never be enough. My sister never had to try. She was their golden child, the perfect daughter. And I was just there. I remember the moments clearly, the times when my parents praised her achievements and overlooked mine. They praised her for acing her math test, yet barely acknowledged the fact that I had won a scholarship. It was always like this. No matter how much I did, it never compared to her. No matter how much I gave, it was never enough. But even through all of it, I still loved them. I didn't know how to stop loving them, even when they made me feel so invisible. And when I became a mother, I thought, surely things would change. Surely they would treat my daughter with the same love they had given to my sister. I was wrong. They didn't even blink when I asked them for help to save her. It was then that I realized something I'd never truly understood before. This family, the family I had fought so hard for, had never really been mine. The diagnosis hit like a thunderclap, sudden and terrifying. Lily, my precious daughter, had always been healthy, bubbly, energetic, the light of my life. But then, out of nowhere, the symptoms started. Constant fatigue, bruises that wouldn't fade, a pale complexion that made her look like a shadow of herself. I took her to the doctor, desperate for answers, and what we found out shattered everything. It was leukemia, a rare, aggressive form. Without immediate treatment, she didn't have long. The doctor explained the options. A life-saving procedure, a bone marrow transplant, a fighting chance for my daughter. But there was a catch. It would cost $150,000. That figure hung over me like a dark cloud. I didn't have that kind of money. I wasn't even close. But I knew where I had to turn, my parents. They had always been well off, and I thought surely they would help. They had to. My daughter's life was at stake. I reached out, my voice trembling, my hands shaking as I explained the urgency. Please, Mom, Dad, it's Lily. She needs this treatment. Without it, we don't have much time. I could hear the strain in my voice, the desperation that I tried so hard to hold back. But all I received in response was cold indifference. My father's voice was distant, detached. I'm sorry, but we just can't do it. We've got other expenses. And just like that, the door slammed shut in my face. But I wasn't prepared for the cruel contrast that would follow. A week later, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from my sister, gloating about her wedding. The wedding they had spent an extravagant $350,000 on. My parents had spared no expense, throwing her a celebration so grand that it made my heart ache just to think about it. I could see the photos, the designer dress, the luxury venue, the endless food and drink. It was a spectacle, an event that my parents had poured their entire savings into, and they couldn't spare a penny for their granddaughter's life? The devastation was overwhelming. I wanted to break down, scream, punch something, anything. But I couldn't. Not in front of Lily. Not in front of my daughter, who had no idea that her life was hanging by a thread. So I forced myself to stay composed, to hold it together. But inside, I was falling apart. I had always tried so hard to be the good daughter, the good mother. But this was too much. I couldn't let it go. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The wedding was everything my sister had ever dreamed of, an extravagant affair that could have easily been the cover story for some high-end bridal magazine. The venue was a grand estate on the outskirts of the city, its towering white columns gleaming under the bright lights of an endless, starry night. There were chandeliers that glittered like diamonds, a sparkling lake, and a pristine ballroom that could have housed a small army. The entire place looked like something out of a fairy tale, and it was all paid for by my parents without a second thought. They spared no expense. My sister, wearing a gown that looked like it had been designed by the gods, floated down the aisle as everyone watched, captivated. The dress sparkled in the light, the veil trailing behind her like a shimmering cloud. There were endless rows of roses, perfectly placed in crystal vases. The tables were draped in silk linens, and each guest had a personal waiter assigned to them. The food was endless: lobster, truffle oil, foie gras. Champagne flowed freely all night long. There were performances, a live band, and speeches that praised my sister's every achievement, her every triumph. And there I was, sitting at home in a tiny, rundown apartment, waiting for a call, waiting for help that would never come. I kept hearing about the wedding through my phone, texts, posts, even phone calls from relatives gushing about how beautiful everything was, how perfect my sister looked. But I couldn't bring myself to watch it. I couldn't stand to see how, once again, my parents had poured all their love, all their attention, and all their money into her while I was left struggling. As the days went on, the photos came flooding in. First the wedding, then the honeymoon, and soon gifts, flowers, thank you notes. Everything was a celebration of my sister, a never-ending parade of her happiness. My parents sent me a message, of course. A brief one: "We're sorry about Lily. We'll keep you in our thoughts," as if their perfunctory words could somehow erase the pain. But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't just about the money. It was about something deeper, something that had been a part of our family for as long as I could remember. The favoritism that had always been there. As a child, I could never escape it. My sister had always been the one who got the extra hugs, the attention, the praise. I had always been the one standing in the shadows, watching as my parents doted on her and neglected me. I remember once when I was about 10 years old, I worked so hard on a school project, a science fair that I was certain would impress my parents. When I came home, proudly holding my display board, my dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "Oh, that's nice," he said absently, not even giving it a second glance. But when my sister came home with a report card full of A's, my mom hugged her, telling her how proud she was, how brilliant she was. I never got that. I never got that acknowledgement, that recognition. And now, here I was again, standing alone, left to fight for my daughter's life while they threw money at a celebration that would be forgotten in a year. The anger, the betrayal, the years of emotional neglect hit me all at once. And I felt it then, deep in my gut, the realization that I had been nothing more than an afterthought to them my entire life. But I wasn't going to let this go. Not anymore. The pain in my chest was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the turmoil inside my head. Every day, I wrestled with the urge to confront my parents, to scream at them for what they had done. They had turned their backs on my daughter when she needed them the most. How could they be so blind? How could they be so heartless? But despite the fire raging inside me, I held my tongue. I kept my emotions buried deep, not wanting to make a scene, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I had always been the quiet one, the one who swallowed her anger and just dealt with it. My whole life, I had stayed silent, hoping that one day they would notice me, that they would see my worth. But that day never came. Instead, I channeled all that anger, all that bitterness, into something else. Quiet determination. I wasn't going to beg them for help. I wasn't going to cry or plead. If they couldn't see how much I needed them, if they couldn't understand that a mother's love for her child knows no bounds, then I would have to figure this out on my own. The thought of asking them for money again was unbearable. I couldn't do it. Not after what they had done. That's when my in-laws stepped in. When my daughter's condition worsened and the $150,000 for the procedure seemed impossible to raise, my in-laws didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, they sold their home. They sacrificed everything just to help us. Their love and support were unwavering, a stark contrast to the indifference I'd received from my own parents. I remember the look on their faces when they told me they had made the decision. "We'll do whatever it takes," they said. "We're family. You don't have to carry this burden alone." And in that moment, I realized what true family was. It wasn't about money or lavish gestures. It was about loyalty, about being there when it mattered most, about love that didn't have conditions attached. I had always believed that blood was thicker than water, that family was supposed to be your safe haven. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the word family meant something different to me now. Loyalty wasn't something I could expect from those who had failed me over and over again. Love wasn't about obligation or about who had the biggest house or the most money. It was about support, trust, and standing by someone in their darkest hour. The contrast between the support I received from my in-laws and the betrayal from my own family was not lost on me. And it stung. It stung in ways I couldn't even put into words. But as the days passed, the pain began to turn into something else, something stronger. It became a quiet resolve, a determination to never rely on the people who had let me down. If they couldn't offer their support, I would make my own way. And I knew deep down that there would come a day when my parents would have to answer for their actions. The day I finally decided to act, it wasn't because I wanted revenge, it was because I wanted respect. It was because I wanted to protect my daughter's future and ensure that no one, especially my parents, could ever disregard us again. I had spent too many years in their shadows, watching as they pampered my sister and neglected me, as they played favorites and made me feel insignificant. But that day, I realized something. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their money. I just needed to take control, and I would do it on my terms. So I began. Slowly, quietly, I started to sever the ties that had bound me to them for so long. I took steps that, at first glance, might seem small, but every move I made was a silent declaration of power. The first thing I did was unlink my account from their utilities. It seemed like a minor detail, but to me, it symbolized the shift. I wasn't relying on them anymore. I didn't need them to control any part of my life. Every bill, every connection, every trace of their involvement in my financial existence was gone. That action alone was a quiet rebellion against the years of neglect, a statement that I was no longer tethered to their whims. Next, I took control of the situation with their car, something they had taken for granted, something they assumed would always be in their name. I transferred the title to my own, making sure to document everything carefully. This wasn't an impulsive move. It was a calculated decision. In one swift action, I not only ensured that I was no longer financially dependent on them, but I also set up the groundwork for a bigger, more impactful shift in the power dynamics between us. I could feel the shift in my body and my breath. Every move I made was a step further from the emotional trap they had set for me. I knew they wouldn't see it coming. I wasn't loud, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even confronting them. I was simply taking control of my life. And in doing so, I was setting the stage for a reckoning they would never expect. It wasn't just about making financial decisions, though. It was about emotional autonomy. I began to withdraw from family events, slowly distancing myself from the toxic environment they had created. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't owe them anything. My absence became a statement in itself. There were moments of doubt, of course, small whispers in my mind asking if I was being too harsh, if I should just forgive and forget. But every time I thought about my daughter, about the sacrifice my in-laws had made for us, I knew I was doing the right thing. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about ensuring my daughter's future, about making sure she would never have to face the same betrayal I had. I could feel the weight of what was coming. Every move I made, every decision, was setting the stage for something bigger. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. They had no idea what was coming, and I was going to make sure they never forgot. The day I had spent so many months preparing for finally arrived. I had been meticulous in my planning, careful in every detail. My parents had no idea what was coming, but I did. The foundation I had laid, step by step, was about to shake their world to its core. But it wasn't going to be loud, and it wasn't going to be dramatic. No, this was going to be quiet, subtle, but devastating. I'd always known that my parents' wealth was tied to their egos. It was the one thing they valued above all else, and they had no idea that they had already given me the power to dismantle it. Through years of silent persistence, I had accumulated knowledge, formed relationships, and set up the pieces without ever revealing my hand. My actions had been calculated, and now everything was in place. I transferred their most valuable assets, one by one, into my name. It was all legal, every move backed by paperwork, contracts, and signatures. There were no loud confrontations, no explosive arguments. Everything was done under the radar, silently, with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The companies, the properties, the funds, they were all mine now. They never suspected a thing, never imagined that the quiet daughter they had neglected for so long could execute something so calculated. As I sat in my living room, staring at the numbers on the screen, I felt no triumph, no victory lap. It wasn't about the money. It never was. I had set out not to destroy their lives, but to reclaim mine, to show them once and for all that I wasn't their pawn, that I was strong, capable, and in control. When they found out, and they would be devastated. But I wasn't going to be there to witness it. I wasn't going to rub their faces in it. That wasn't my style. They had already lost what mattered most. Their respect for me, their family, their dignity. The money was just the vehicle that got me here. I watched in silence as the ripple effects began to hit them. It was subtle at first. They started questioning their finances, wondering why things weren't adding up. It wasn't until they tried to access their funds, the ones they'd spent their lives building, that the truth hit them like a ton of bricks. They couldn't reach it. They couldn't access the wealth they had assumed would always be theirs. My parents, who had lived their lives thinking they could do whatever they pleased, now had nothing. No empire, no safety net. Just an empty shell. I didn't feel a rush of anger, nor did I feel any joy in their suffering. I didn't care about watching them squirm. What mattered was that I had reclaimed my dignity. I had taken control of my life, my daughter's future, and I had done it with silence, with dignity, and with unwavering resolve. Looking back, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led me here. I thought about the pain, the betrayal, the years of feeling overlooked and ignored. But more than that, I thought about the growth. I thought about how far I had come from that vulnerable, desperate woman who had pleaded for her parents' help. I had transformed. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer the daughter who begged for scraps of affection and support. I had become someone stronger, someone who had taken her power back. In that moment of reflection, I realized that my revenge wasn't really about my parents at all. It wasn't about hurting them or watching them suffer. It was about showing myself and my daughter that I had the strength to overcome anything. That no one, not even family, could ever take that from me again. As for them, they would never be the same. They might never understand why I did what I did, but it didn't matter. Their lesson had been taught in the only way that truly mattered. The phone call came unexpectedly. The name on the screen was all too familiar. My parents. It was a number I had blocked for years, but here it was, flashing on my phone, demanding my attention. For a brief moment, I almost didn't answer. The weight of everything that had led me here, the years of silence, the moments of betrayal, all came rushing back. But curiosity got the better of me, and with a deep breath, I swiped to answer. Their voices were shaking, trembling with a desperation I had never heard before. It was strange. My parents, the same people who had turned their backs on me when I needed them most, now sounded like lost children. Weak, broken, vulnerable. They pleaded with me, their words stumbling over one another as they tried to explain themselves. Please, honey, we didn't mean for it to go this far. You have to understand we were just trying to maintain our lives, our legacy. We didn't think you needed us, but now we have nothing. Please, we need you. The words were hollow. I could hear the panic in their voices, but there was something else there too, regret. But I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for them. Not after everything they had put me through. They had let my daughter suffer. They had abandoned me when I needed them most. And now they were paying the price. It wasn't a price I had inflicted upon them. It was the natural consequence of their actions. I took a deep breath. I had prepared for this moment, knowing it would come eventually. I had known that they would beg for forgiveness, just like they always had. But things had changed. I had changed. I'm sorry, I said, my voice steady and calm, betraying none of the emotion I felt inside. You had your chance. You chose your path, and I chose mine. There's no going back from here. I can't help you. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear their ragged breaths, their attempts to hold it together. But I knew it was over. The call was a desperate grasp at something they had lost forever, their hold on me. It wasn't about money or guilt or even love anymore. It was about the fact that I was no longer the daughter they could control. I was no longer a part of their toxic world. And that was my power. The silence stretched on for a long moment before my father spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. I never thought it would come to this. You were my daughter. I was just trying to protect our legacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Protecting your legacy at the cost of your family, I replied, my voice cold now. Maybe if you had spent more time protecting the people who loved you, you wouldn't have ended up like this. I hung up the phone without another word. I had nothing more to say to them. I had given them every chance to make things right, and they had chosen their path. And now I was free. I stood there, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. For so long, I had been tethered to them, their approval, their expectations. But no more. In that moment, I realized something profound. True strength doesn't come from the approval of others. It comes from knowing your worth, even when no one else sees it. My parents would never change. They would never understand why I did what I did. But I didn't need them to understand. I had found peace, not in their forgiveness, but in my own freedom. And so I walked away. I walked away from the toxic love, the empty promises, and the lies. I walked away from everything that had held me back for so long. And in doing so, I walked toward my own future. A future where I was in control. A future where I could finally breathe. In that final moment, I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't about tearing them down. It wasn't about hurting them the way they had hurt me. It was about building myself up. It was about walking away with my dignity intact, knowing that I had made the right choice. Family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, and love. And when those things are missing, no amount of money or status can replace them. As I stepped away from the phone, I couldn't help but think of the lesson I had learned. You can't heal from a wound caused by someone who doesn't even care enough to acknowledge your pain. And in the end, the only thing that truly matters is your own sense of peace. I walked away free. Free from their expectations, free from their judgment, and free from their lies. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to walk away. And that's exactly what I did.